There's an untold story here on the East Coast that is pretty common on the West Coast.
For thousands of years, the runs of Atlantic salmon fed Native Americans in the Kennebec, the Penobscot, the Down East rivers in Maine. The first European settlers that came here depended on Atlantic salmon and other sea-run fish species for their survival. And so they are really critically important culturally, socially, spiritually, economically.
People started harvesting water here in the U.S. for energy, driving sawmills as early as 1624. The footprint of what was done historically, although the forests may be regrown, farm fields may still be there, but the impacts to what was done to our rivers are still ongoing, and they are holding back what the fishery's potential is. And so doing restoration projects, doing things through the Maine Headwaters program, these are targeted efforts to try to rebuild salmon habitat, to rebuild the salmon runs.
We're definitely experiencing everywhere a rapidly changing climate.
Atlantic salmon, to many of us, are really the canary in the coal mine when it comes to the environment, both in freshwater and in the ocean.
And species like Atlantic salmon, which are a cold water fish, are going to be much more sensitive to those changes. And for those species to persist, to thrive in the future, they basically need to get to cold water in the springtime, in the summer, on their own schedule. Atlantic salmon could not get here on their own for the last 200 years because of dams. And now we've been able to restore them in a small population that's actually growing, and they're in some of the best habitat that we have in the United States.
Partnerships are not just important, they're vital. They absolutely have to happen. Every season brings a new type of job. In the winter, sometime after the sun comes up, because that's the cheeriest part of the day, we return to the rivers where we're doing Atlantic salmon recovery, and we plant Atlantic salmon eggs.
It's like a dream. You're having that direct experience with the life cycle of a fish that's native to our rivers, that spends time in the oceans. They go off of Greenland, and you're seeing the beginning of their life. I mean, there's nothing like that.
Our biggest focus is still dealing with barriers. We have hundreds of dams in our salmon watershed still. We don't need to remove every single one. We look at our rivers very strategically and say, if we can remove these 1, 2, or 3 dams, we can open up X hundreds of miles of habitat and the best habitat, and we can restore salmon by doing that.
It takes a lot to make a habitat project happen, and it's almost too much for any one organization to work in isolation.
We're all sort of spokes in a wheel, and no single spoke is really able to recover salmon on their own. I can't do it on my own. What we need are all of the army of people out there, like the Atlantic Salmon Federation, that are removing dams, that are installing passage.
We work very, very closely with the Maine Department of Marine Resources, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA Fisheries, and the NOAA Restoration Center, and a huge number of other conservation groups. And collectively, we've got a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise, and a lot of tools that allow us to say, these are the areas that are most important for Atlantic salmon, for alewives, for these other species. That allows us to take a focused approach to put our dollars on the ground and get the biggest bang for the buck with the resources that we have.
When we all are able to come together, it's really quite magical. When we're working with the community and we're spending that time figuring out, what are some issues and how can we improve this area for you? And oftentimes we're trying to figure out how to create more public access. Everybody is always excited to see the fish return and watch the migrations unfold, and they can tangibly see their water quality change. They can see the makeup of mammals and birds transform and become restored with more native species.
Without this work in this watershed, there wouldn't be any Atlantic salmon up here. We've been able to reintroduce them, and I'm really proud of the fact that they're here in relatively large numbers. Adults are now returning to the river. We're doing everything we can and getting as many of those adults upstream and releasing them into this habitat. And we're starting to see the fruits of that. So I'm absolutely happy with the progress that we've made so far. Of course, it's just the beginning.
Places like Temple Stream, the Walton's Mill Dam removal effort, Cooper's Mills Dam, which was recently removed here, Head Tide Dam, a little lower down in the Sheepscot. These are all sites that have vast amounts of habitat upstream, but if the fish can't get upstream, that habitat is of little to no use.
We've been extremely successful here in Maine getting large federal grants to do a lot of restoration projects. And as part of that, we also have to raise a lot of private funding. And we've been able to do that over time for small projects and large projects. As the amount of funding available gets more competitive, the support of our members and our donors is critically important for us to continue our restoration and conservation work here in Maine.
So while there is a sense of accomplishment at everything that we've done in the watershed, it is certainly not done. We still have work to do.
As we allow people to access our rivers and as we increase our water quality and improve safe access and we increase the populations of fish, that inspires the next generation to become attached, to have those precious experiences where they feel inspired to then protect, restore. So we're really creating a sustainable future for restoration and protection in Maine.